go ahead and enter your name, organization, your title, and your email address in the chat box. And if you are calling in, please email that information to coc@rivco.org. Since it is 2 o'clock, we will go ahead and get started. So my name is Lindsay Sisti, and I am the program manager for the ESG-CV RFP process, and I wanted to go ahead and introduce the rest of our COC team. So Natalis, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. Good afternoon. My name is Natalis Ng, and I'm the Admin Services Officer of the COC division in the Housing Homelessness Prevention and Workforce Solutions Department of the County of Riverside.
Tanya, would you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Tanya Torno. I am the manager for the Continuum of Care in Riverside County. Thank you for joining us today.
Brandon?
Hi, my name is Brandon Trom. I am the Administrative Services Supervisor in charge of the fiscal unit for HHPWS Continuum of Care. My team, we do budgeting for the Continuum of Care, and we also we receive the claims and examine and process them and make payment requests once they're approved.
And then we have Scott Haddon. All right, I don't know where Scott must have stepped away. We have Melanie from the COC.
Hi, Melanie Wilson. I'm Administrative Services Assistant here with the COC.
And last but not least, we have Catalina.
Hi, I'm Catalina Gutron, and I am the Contracts and Grants Analyst for the Housing Homelessness Prevention and Workforce Solutions, and I look forward to working with all of you guys in the future.
Perfect. And all right, Catalina, if we want to go ahead and move up to the agenda. We might be experiencing some difficulties here. Catalina, can you hear me okay? I think I can take control here. And
is the agenda not showing up?
No, it's not. We're stuck on the first page. Bear with us 1 minute, guys. You know how these calls go. Technical difficulties all around, and we even practiced and we still have them.
Is it available now?
And let's make use of this time. And if you have not done so yet, and please put your name, position, and email address and organization name in the chat box. And then we see that quite a number of you have already done that. That's great because this sign in is us. And then if there is anything we need to get back to you, we have your contact email address. So and then we noticed that I think thank you very much, LaDonna. Thank you for signing in on the chat box. And we would like to know which organization you are from. And would you mind putting in the chat box which organization you are from?
I have.
Thank you. Oh, you have, great. Okay,
yes.
So thank you very much. And yeah, so let's see how we are doing with the slides, and then we will continue momentarily.
Lindsay, would you like me to try?
Yeah, could you please? I'm having a hiccup on my end as well.
Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Ah, beautiful. All right. Thank you, Jamie, to the rescue. So if we could go ahead and move forward to the agenda. Thanks, everybody, for your patience. So today is going to be an exciting day. Any chance for new funding is makes any day a good day. So today we are going to be reviewing this RFP opportunity, the BOG funding principles, what funding we have available through this RFP. We have two types of programs that we've combined into a single RFP, which is our standard 2020 ESG and our ESG. We're going to refer to it throughout this presentation as ESG-CV, which is for ESG coronavirus funding that was passed by Congress under the CARES Act. We're going to be reviewing the timeline, important dates, what the evaluation process looks like, our budget, and then we're going to save some time for the end for questions. We have a pretty busy agenda, and for individuals who aren't able to hop on this conference, we ask that any questions you have, you type into the chat box, or if you're calling in, if you email coc@rivco.org, because we are going to be compiling a Q&A after this presentation that will be posted for all interested applicants to view. So we can go ahead and move to the next slide, Catalina. So the conference today, it is a non-mandatory pre-bid conference. With that being said, we do encourage any agencies interested in participating in this RFP process to stay tuned for the entire conference. I know many of you are familiar with our ESG, but we also are going to be discussing our ESG coronavirus funding, which has different rules connected to it and works slightly different than our traditional ESG funding. Again, we'll remind you throughout this conference, but it's very important that you do sign in with your name, title, email, and the agency you are from in the chat box. So moving forward, we are going to go ahead and pass it along to Tanya, who will be discussing the COC Board of Governance funding principles. So Tanya, over to you.
All right, so once again, good afternoon. My name is Tanya Torno. I am the manager for the Continuum of Care program, and I have the wonderful privilege of working with the entire team that has put together this bidders conference and will be working with our soon-to-be contracted vendors to administer services under the Emergency Solutions Grant. I will be talking about the Board of Governance funding principles. And before we jump in, I just wanted to give some background. Our continuum of care is made up of over 100 different members throughout Riverside County who all represent both public and private agencies who are homeless advocates, housing advocates, and many of which deliver direct services that are state, federally, and privately funded. The Continuum of Care has a governing body, which we refer to as the Board of Governance. You'll hear us use the acronym BOG quite frequently. And this group meets at least 6 times a year, every other month, to different priorities for the Continuum of Care, in addition to coordinating funding priorities. And so it is definitely important for us to note that as staff works with a panel, an evaluators panel that will be looking at each of the proposals and working with staff to prepare funding recommendations, all of those recommendations will go before this governing body for review and approval. We have about 14 members on the BOG. They are all voted on by the Continuum of Care members that have established voting rights. In the chat box, I am sending a link to the Riverside County Continuum of Care page, where you will find a copy of the BOG roster, in addition to links to the various meetings where you can also get more information on the various continuum of care members. With that said, in recognizing the Board of Governance role, they have developed specific guiding principles that they will consider when reviewing and making funding determinations that ensure that projects that are funded are working towards reduce homelessness in Riverside County. We believe that we can work towards ending homelessness and that such a world does exist, so that people who experience homelessness only do so for a very short length of time before they are linked to a housing provider. And again, the Board of Governance is very much invested in making sure that the projects that are funded demonstrate sustainable results. That means that people who receive services through these funded projects, whether it being a street outreach or an emergency shelter or rental assistance projects, that those services truly result in a permanent housing solution and a reduced recidivism rate. That means people that are being served are not returning back into homelessness. In addition, and as equally as important, is looking at our existing service distribution county-wide and ensuring that we are taking into account where our greatest needs are across the county. We do that using a data-driven approach by looking at who we're serving and tracking that in our homeless management information system. Those of us that have been in the world long enough know it as HMIS. So we look into that software system to see who has been served and where. And we also use the annual homeless point in time count data as an indicator to help us reflect where needs are the greatest. In addition, you'll hear us quite frequently talk about housing first, which again is a research principle that demonstrates that in order to help people resolve their homelessness, we need to connect them to housing, and then the service provision piece needs to follow very soon thereafter. So the Board of Governance is very much invested in ensuring projects have a good wraparound service plan for clients that are being served through the various programs. In addition, there is an emphasis in that we are prioritizing encampments. Catalina, if you can jump over to the next slide. And the last focus is making sure that these principles and the agencies that are applying for the various activities design projects that align with the county's homeless action plan. We included a link on the PowerPoint that you can select and will take you to that 21 strategy focus plan. In summary, this plan really focuses on the expansion of system coordination, outreach, navigation, and supportive services, in addition to the identification of housing resources. So with that, I'll go ahead and hand it back to Lindsay Sisti, who will begin to provide us with an overview of the eligible uses of ESG and ESG-CV funding.
Perfect. Thank you, Tanya. And just as a reminder, we had a few more individuals hop on the call while you're speaking. Any new participants, if you could please enter your name, title, organization, and email address in the chat box. And if you are calling in, if you could email that information over to coc@rivco.org. And again, my name is Lindsay Sisti, and I'm the program manager that will be working on this RFP. So just as a general overview, what is the Emergency Solutions Program, which I will be referring to as ESG? This is to get people housed and keep people housed. So ESG provides shelter and services to help persons experiencing homelessness or persons at risk of homelessness regain housing stability. We have two different funding sources available in this RFP. So I want to make that very clear. Even though they are both ESG funding, these are two separate programs that have been combined onto a single RFP. So we have first our 2020 ESG annual allocation. This is the ESG funding we tend to get every year. This year, HCD, which is the California Department of Housing and Community Development, received approximately $6.28 million in federal funds. Of that, we have about $293,000 available for agencies to apply for under the 2020 ESG program. And we'll get into what are the eligible activities shortly. So that is our first program in this RFP. The second program is our ESG-CV, which again is our coronavirus response fund. This is the first time we have received this particular funding. The state received $42 million in one-time funding to prevent, prepare for, and respond to COVID-19 with this allocation, and we have about 1.3 million available under the ESG-CV and funds for agencies to apply for. We will get into what the differences are between these two ESG allocations, as some of the conditions and guidelines are different for both. So with this RFP, again, we have two program types, but there are 6 project types within this RFP that are eligible for you to apply for. We have our 2020 ESG Rapid Rehousing Funding, our 2020 ESG Homeless Prevention Funding, and then under our coronavirus funding, we have ESG Rapid Rehousing, Homeless Prevention, Emergency Shelter, and Street Outreach. So when you're looking at what you're wanting to apply for, know that you can apply for all of these projects. You don't have to limit yourself to just one type. So we're going to get into a description of what these eligible activities are. So the eligible activities that fall under both ESG and the ESG coronavirus funding are homeless prevention and rapid rehousing. These are the only 2 activities that are eligible under both program types. Examples of eligible activities under the homeless prevention and rapid rehousing are short-term rental assistance, which is rental assistance up to 3 months, medium-term rental assistance, which is rental assistance up to 24 months, payment of rental arrears up to 6 months. Other financial assistance includes application fees, security and utility deposits, utility payments, last month's rent, moving costs, and it can also assist with housing search and placement, housing stability case management, landlord-tenant mediation, tenant legal services, and credit repair. Now we're getting into eligible activities that are only eligible under the ESG coronavirus. So we have emergency shelter. I want you to keep in mind throughout this presentation that the coronavirus funding can only be used to prevent, prepare for, and respond to the coronavirus. So keep that in mind when you're making decisions on what you're wanting to apply for. But for ESG-CV emergency shelter, eligible costs include ordering personal protective equipment, expansion of shelter navigation services to decrease length of time individuals stay in shelters, and shelter conversion to expand to non-congregate shelter. This also can cover all the essential services to families and individuals that are in emergency shelters. The other eligible activity under ESG-CV is street outreach. Again, it is only it's not under a regular ESG allocation. It is only under the coronavirus ESG allocation to prevent, prepare for, and respond to the coronavirus. So ESG-CV street outreach can be used, again, to provide personal protective equipment, toiletries, and supplies to those who are unsheltered, engagement of unsheltered individuals to connect them to coordinated entry and non-congregate shelters or rapid rehousing, ramping up your street outreach efforts, which could be increasing your staffing, mobile assessment, engagement and case management to support linkages to housing and transportation. All righty, so I'm going to pass it over to Tanya. She is going to be highlighting some of the differences between the ESG annual allocation and the ESG-CV funds.
Thank you, Lindsay. So let's jump right in and start talking about the differences. What you will find here is there is much more flexibility with the ESG-CV funding. As Lindsay expressed, these funds are in response to the pandemic, and so we greatly appreciate the state and the federal flexibility from our partners at the state and federal level. With the 2020 ESG funds, all recipients, so that includes both clients that are served under the homeless prevention and rapid rehousing category, must fall under the 30% area median income limits. For ESG-CV clients who are served under homeless prevention, you'll see that the state and really our federal partners, because the funds ultimately come from HUD, increased the income limits to 50% area median income. This speaks to the efforts that are being made across the board to ensure that more people who are renting are able to keep their current housing. So we certainly appreciate being able to serve a larger demographic of folks. As we have all seen, there has been a continued express need for homeless prevention, which in short provides assistance to individuals who are past due with their rent. In addition, with the 2020 ESG funding, there is a cap of 60%, which means that of the total funds that our continuum of care received, 60% must be dedicated towards emergency shelter and street outreach activities. Earlier, we announced the amount of the 2020 ESG portion that is available through this RFP. This 60% cap is based on the total amount that we received, including the small administrative dollars that our team receives to administer the program. Of that, I just want to make sure everyone knows 181,000 needs to be spent on these two specific activities, and again, only for the 2020 ESG allocation. Those of us that have done ESG for a long time are also familiar with the match requirement. So both HUD and the state do require a dollar per dollar match. That means if your request is for $50,000 to administer a rental assistance or rapid rehousing program, there is a requirement that you will be able to provide a dollar per dollar or a $50,000 match. With ESG-CV, we see that there is no cap and there is flexibility for communities to use the total allocation on various activities. In addition, there is no match requirement, so I'm sure there are some of you like me who just did a little dance because that is a big, big deal. We can jump over now to the next slide. So this slide speaks to when can services begin, or at what point can agencies submit claims for reimbursement once awarded. With the 2020 ESG funding, all activities will begin once the standard agreement is executed, and that standard agreement is issued to continuums of care, usually once subrecipients have been awarded. We still have not received our standard agreement from the state, but we will notify the agencies that are awarded upon execution of that agreement. And again, your ability to bill back for costs will begin or are eligible once that document is signed. For ESG-CV, again, because these are funds that directly support the pandemic, we have been provided with the ability to allow our subrecipients or contracted vendors to begin or claim services going back to when the state declared the disaster, which is March 4th, 2020. The next piece here is in regards to the environmental reviews. This is the process in which the county, so in this case, our internal team, our continuum of care staff, would review each project to ensure that they do not negatively impact surrounding areas. For the 2020 ESG allocation, we are required to conduct an environmental clinics for all projects, including temporary shelters. For the ESG-CV funded projects, we have been given some flexibility to preclude temporary shelters from meeting that requirement. And we can now jump over to the next slide, which breaks down the time frame to expend ESG-CV funds. Again, noting that this time frame table only applies to the ESG funding that is set aside specifically for or in response to the pandemic. So you'll see the breakdown starting 20% of funds need to be spent down by July 31st, 2021. And this 20% increment continues through the end of the program year of August 31st, 2022. It's important to note that once we have identified our subrecipients for the ESG-CV award, that in our execution of the contracts, we will work with subrecipients to make sure that there is a plan in place to meet these benchmarks. And we can jump over to the next slide, which talks about ineligible uses. Both ESG and ESG-CV funds cannot be used to acquire real property. They cannot be used towards new construction. They cannot be used to support structures that would support religious activities. In addition, they do not support mortgage assistance payments like the Emergency Food and Shelter Program. I say that only to make a pitch to the Emergency Food and Shelter Program, EFSP, that does provide mortgage assistance. In addition, ESG funds cannot be used to support any substance use or recovery type of programs. And unfortunately, the funds can also not be used to support legal services for immigration and other citizenship matters. And with that, very happy to introduce our guest of the hour. I say that because Scott Hayden is with our Riverside County procurement or purchasing team, and we feel so fortunate. He has been our guiding light as our team has worked to facilitate the bidding conferences for our other programs. If you have participated in the others we have hosted through HHAP and KESH2, then you are familiar with him. We're just so thankful for him. Scott, I'll go ahead and let you take it away from here. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Tanya, for that great intro. And you guys are a great team to be with, by the way. So I kind of messed up when you were going through and doing introductions. I did that classic. I had the mute button on, and I was talking, but of course nobody heard me. So so apologies for that. I'm from County Purchasing. I'm a senior procurement contract specialist, and I'm assigned to the homeless unit. And like Tanya was saying, this is our third remote bidders conference. So I don't think anybody else has done this at all in the county. So we're definitely trailblazers in this. And with a few couple technical difficulties here and there, I think we're doing okay. And I think even after the pandemic is over and all that, this will be the new normal, conducting these meetings remotely. So anyway, getting on to the timeline here, the slide that's currently up on the screen. So we've already gone through having this posted, and we're on to the pre-bidders conference, so everybody's involved in that. So after that, we're going to have what's called a Q&A, questions and answers. So we're going to capture some of your questions and answers from this meeting, and we'll post it on public purchase. But if you have, always questions lead to more questions, we'll answer something and it'll lead to another question. So we'll put more of those Q&As on there, and then by the 8th, we're going to have everything answered, and then on the 14th is our submittal closing date. So that's very important to all of you. I would not wait till the last minute to bring your proposals to County Purchasing, which is over on Washington Street off the 91 near Home Depot. Sometimes the ramps are closed, or there's a train that'll block everything up. There's all kinds of unexpecteds, and in the world of COVID and the year of 2020, expect the unexpected. So my suggestion is to get those to us sooner than later. So if you get back up on the timeline, this is going to go through a couple more things. So anyway, when we get your proposals, we're going to go through them. We're going to do a threshold review and make sure everything's there. And then it's going to go through the review process. And we're going to have a review committee, evaluators that are on this review committee that may not know anything about your company, may not know anything about your proposal. So when you go through them and you're filling this thing out, just pretend that you're putting this out to somebody who may not know anything about your company or what you're proposing. And so this group is going to meet and go through these proposals and score them. And when we go through this process, there might be some things where we may need to have clarification. So that's where it says February 2021 tentative. So we may send clarifications to you if we're interested in your proposal, and also final offers. We call them BAFOs, best and final offers. So we may submit those too, along with the clarifications. And then on March 2021, we'll go to the BOG, the Board of Governance, the COC Board of Governance. Shortly after that, after they reviewed it and they go through the recommended awards, that'll go on to our board of supervisors to get the final approval. And then somewhere around April, the agreements will be sent off to get signed somewhere around April, May. And then, of course, services begin and will end within either 12 months or August 31st of 2022. So think that's pretty much on the timeline. So if you can go to the next slide. What I was talking about before is a threshold review. So we're going to go through and before we give it to the research team, the evaluators to go through and read them and score them, we want to make sure that everything is there, that your proposals are compliant. They hit all the check marks. So some of the things we're going to look for is, did you put the cost in? If the cost is missing, then we can't take that proposal. So there's some things that we may go back and we can make, if we have time, we'll give you a short deadline of, hey, you forgot this, can you please send it, like financials or resumes, credentials, that sort of thing. It's important also too, the scope of work is like really the most important piece of it, of that and the cost. So if you notice there's things missing in it, we may have issues with that too. So make sure you fill out all the questions on that. There's a section called tab C, and that's in the attachment A of the RFP, and that's your company profile. So please make sure you go through all that and again, check off all the boxes of everything we ask you for. So basically the threshold review is we're just kind of screening it before we put it together and present it to the evaluators. Okay, next screen. Yeah, and I kind of went through that. So there's, we're going to look for resumes, credentials, and everything else we're asking for. So again, please read the RFP. And if you have any questions, don't be afraid to ask us. So evaluation scoring process. So like I said, we're going to have an evaluator team. We have them sign a conflict of interest form. We want to make sure that there's no conflicts at all with this review panel having to do with anything. So we definitely check that out. We will explain to the panel how to review. We're always around if they have questions for us. We meet usually a couple times. Again, it may be remotely, and we go through and we review the scores and make sure everybody's on the same page. One good thing with the review panel is we may have a cross of different people with different experiences and backgrounds and their own credentials. And so that's a good thing, because when we have this evaluation group, we want to have it looked at from different angles. And then when we get together, we can discuss the scores and did anybody miss anything. So we go through a tight process on this before we have it scored, and we have our award recommendations that go to the Board of Governance. Next slide. Oh, okay, so in there we have what's called a scope of work or scope of services, and that's in the attachment A of the RFP. There's two different sections of the RFP, and I'll discuss that more, but in attachment A is the most important piece, and it has to do with the scope of services, and within there we have what's called criteria questions. And so in those criteria questions, fill that out as well as you can with quality information. We don't want a lot of fluff in there, but again, we don't want like a yes or no answer or limited information. So give it some thought. That's where you're going to get scored. And these are different criteria, so I can kind of explain a little bit. I'm sure you've seen all this already looking at the RFP. But the program design is basically, you're going through each project type and you're explaining how you're going to service us and the clients basically in those different project types. That's worth 25 points. So when this all gets added up, it's going to equal 100. The next one is, here we go. Hang on one sec. Okay, so the next one is need for funds. If you can go back up one slide. Oh, I'm sorry, you're on the right slide. Okay, so need for funds and cost effectiveness. So this is kind of a two-part one. This is where we take your cost that you send in, and that's embedded in this. That's probably worth about 25 points. The other 10 is the need for funds. So how difficult is it to attain these funds for these services, and do you hit all the target areas that are underserved? Next slide. impact and effectiveness. So how quickly can you achieve quality outcomes? So we have a series of questions in there. So please fill that out and explain it as with much detail as you can without, again, adding a lot of fluff in there. And the reason I say that is because when the evaluators are going through it, you want to make it as easy for them to understand it and to quantitatively and objectively give you good scores. So you don't want to leave out any detail, but you don't want to make it where, wait a minute, what are they talking about? Continuing care requirements. So you hit all the different requirements that the COC is asking. And then the timeliness is basically, give us your project timeline and explain the different milestones and key activities, benchmarks, and target dates. So that's where that is, and that's where the scores come in on that one. Okay, next slide. Okay, so in the RFP, I was explaining there's two sections. We have one section which is called T's and C's, terms and conditions, and that's just basically, giving you detail how to put your proposal together, and it gives you a basic boilerplate of what the contract's going to look like. And then we have our basic terms and conditions in there having to do with insurance, things like that. So when you do submit your proposals, what we ask you to do is submit one original and then one copy. So when these come in, we want them submitted to County Purchasing, which is off Washington Street at 2980 Washington Street, between Arlington and Madison. And again, please get it there before 1:30 on this middle deadline. I think it's December 14th. So try to get it there sooner than later, just for your own sanity. And again, I went through the scope of services, the scope of work we went through. And so those are different areas within all those different groups. Again, there's a whole selection of criteria questions. And it's like a bubble where you fill in you answer it and it just keeps expanding. So I can't emphasize that enough. Give us as much detail without confusing. And I think that's it. So if anybody has any questions, don't be afraid to email me or send it in on the Q&A process. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Scott. And now I am going to pass it over to our Administrative Services Supervisor to discuss cost proposal and budget narrative. So Brandon, I'm going to pass it to you.
And just a quick reminder, everyone, to make sure you sign in and or email us at coc@rivco.org if you came on late. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brandon Trajo. I'm the Administrative Services Supervisor for the HHPWS COC fiscal team. So I'll be presenting the information here on our cost proposal and budget narrative for this RFP. So in your cost proposal, there will be a template similar to what you see up here for ESG budget and match funds. So for each ESG activity, we want the proposed budget, the match contributions, and the source of the match. So of course, remember that for ESG 2020, 100% match is required, dollar for dollar. But for ESG COVID, there is no match required. So that may be a relief in many ways. For our regular ESG 2020, minimum grant amount is $75,000 and the maximum grant amount is $200,000. The good news is for ESG COVID, there is no minimum or maximum. So we're wide open on that. And we also have a summary of staff to be paid with ESG funds. So what we need for this is all position titles with a brief job description for each staff person that's going to be paid with either ESG or ESG COVID funds. We also need a duty statement for all position titles to let us know what this person will be doing, what are they going to be contributing to the program, and the position title needs to match the duty statement. As well, we need total budget information for each program. So for ESG, this is going to include the actual ESG grant that you're applying for, as well as any sources of match. You see here, there's some possible examples: CalWORKs, other federal or state grants, or private. Wherever that's coming from, we need the total budget information per activity. For ESG COVID, of course, there's no match required, so it can just be the for the ESG COVID grant in that case. And section H2 is our budget narrative. So this is very open-ended. We need a detail of each line item listed on your budget, whether that's staff or rental assistance or any different type of line items. We want to know how you arrived at your cost proposal. So it's really important to have a calculation of the amount requested, and we really as much detail as possible on this. That way we can really see where basically where you're coming from on these numbers, and basically to help really put forth what for us to really get an idea of what you're looking to accomplish with this program. For H3, we have a financial accounting system, and in this one, we just want to provide evidence of internal and external coordination and an adequate financial accounting system. So we're really looking to make sure that your organization is able to handle running the program from a financial and accounting standpoint. We want to just make sure that internally you'll be able to work together with outside organizations such as ourselves and just make sure that everything is able to run smoothly. And to kind of match that purpose as well, we ask for the financial statements. We definitely require a balance sheet and an income statement from within the past 12 months. So the ending date of that income statement and the date of that balance sheet should be from within the past 12 months. Other documentation, such as a statement of cash flows or an audit report, it's optional. We do encourage you to provide as much as possible, just to more information is always better, just to really help us understand where the current state of your organization. It's also very important, we do have a certification that you agree to, that your agency has the financial stability to support the services that are being offered. We want to make sure that you'll be stable and able to continue operating throughout the life of the grant. Also, because of the nature of this, where we get our funds from the state, who gets the funds from the federal government, it can take some time for the whole payment process to go through. And of course, in government, there's always, because we deal with the auditor controller's office, who handles our payments and cuts the checks and the ACH payments. It does take some time. Our goal is typically 45 days from within the time that we receive the claim. But just to make sure that everything can run smoothly, you agree that your early or expedited payments for services delivered, that it's going to be within our time frame that's agreed to. So we just want to make sure that everything is stable there and you have a good cash flow. And as to answer a question that I see in the chat from Alan, so for an audited financial statement, which includes the balance sheet and income statement, that would be fine as long as the balance sheet and income statement are included in there. That's the information we need. So if it's an audited financial statement with basically with everything, including those two items, that would be great. As long as we have those two items that we can see, that would certainly suffice for financial statements. 12 months is going to be the past 12 months from the time that you apply. So if you're applying tomorrow, then we want it to be November 2019 or later. And we also have our project match requirements here. So we do have different requirements. ESG COVID. With ESG grants, the subrecipient is required to match 100% dollar for dollar of the grant amount. And these matching funds must be used for eligible activities. So just like whatever limitations and regulations that you have on the funds that you receive from the grant, it's the same thing for the match. You have to make sure that they're for eligible activities. And ESG matching funds, they can come from any source. So the subrecipient, your agency can provide it yourselves, or if you have another grant, or private resources. And this is a lot simpler with ESG COVID, ESG-CV, because ESG-CV grants do not require a match at all. And to tell you a little bit about our funding process for 2020 ESG and ESG COVID, to tell you a little bit about how this works. We start off, the state issues us a NOFA, a Notice of Funding Availability. So in this case, the 2020 ESG NOFA was issued on May 12th of this year, and ESG-CV was issued on June 1st. And we receive these NOFAs from the state. So in this case, the state is the recipient of funds from the federal government, from HUD, and then they distribute the funds to, the state distributes the funds to counties, and then we distribute it to subrecipients through this process, which you're all taking part in right now. So the administrative entity, HHPWS, applies on behalf of the Riverside County COC. So in terms of that, that's where we apply for all of that funding. We've already done that, and then the state will be issuing a standard agreement to HHPWS. So that should be coming, we hope, in the near future. And then we contract with the vendors. So that's going to be your agencies once we go through this RFP process, and once it's decided which organizations we'll be working with and we'll be contracting with, then we will go through that process of creating those contracts. And finally, the funding must be expended by the deadline. For ESG, it's going to be 12 months from execution of the standard agreement. So that's why I have deadlines to be announced by the state, because we don't quite know yet on ESG 2020. It depends on when that standard agreement gets executed. And ESG COVID, we had that whole chart of 20%, 40%, but the final deadline for expenditures is August 31st of 2022. And before I put it back to Lindsay, I do see we have a question of what if your nonprofit is less than a year old? So I do want to ask, looks like Jackie asked this question. So do you have any type of financial statement that you could submit up to, I know traditionally income statement, of course, you have it for a whole year, and a balance sheet is at a point in time. So you certainly could give us a balance sheet at any point, because that's a single point in time document. And if you have an income statement from the start of your nonprofit up until now, if you can generate that, then that would work.
All right, Brandon, anything else?
I think that's it. I do see a question as well. Provide evidence of non-federal matching funds. So I'm going to have to take a look at this, and then when we do our FAQs, I want to research this and see, because I had seen in NOFA something about the different types of funds that could be used as match, but the RFP states provide evidence of non-federal matching funds. So we're going to need to see what is the actual correct situation there. And then Alan has the cap for admin or indirect for ESG COVID. So for our administrative costs, the way that we do our administrative costs in HHPWS and the COC is we don't do it's just a 10% or a 5%. For our administrative costs, we typically will limit it to about 5% per contract, 5% of the total contract amount. And in this case, what we do with that is we actually go by actual costs. So if you have an accountant or a manager or any administrative costs like office equipment, we go by an actual cost basis for that, like we do for the other categories. And that's all that I have. So I'll take it back to Lindsay to help with any additional questions.
Brandon, so much information. And like Brandon said, some of the questions that are coming in, we might have to clarify, and we will be posting Q&A updates pretty regularly, but do know all the final RFP questions are going to be due to the COC by November 30th, and we will.
Hold on.
Sorry, was somebody saying something? Okay, I will continue. Just remember, if you're not speaking, if you could put yourself on mute. So like I was saying, all questions on the RFP are going to need to be submitted by November 30th by 1 p.m. and we will follow up with posting the final Q&A on December 8th. But we will be sending out regular updates to your questions. With that being said, if anybody has joined the call since we last said the update, could you please type in your name, the organization you're with, your title, and your email. If you have any questions, go ahead and type them in the chat box. While you're doing that, I'm going to run through some FAQs that might be running through your head. This is mainly in part to what types of eligible expenses are allowable. So is personal protective equipment an eligible cost? Yes, under our ESG-CV, it is an eligible cost for street outreach and the emergency shelter component. And ESG-CV is the only program that is funding those two categories. The next frequently asked question, food and eligible expense. Yes, it is eligible under emergency shelter and street outreach. If you're providing food to persons in hotel or motel under emergency shelter, the food must be comparable to what is received in a shelter. And food is not an eligible expense under rapid rehousing or homeless prevention. The next FAQ is our behavioral health services an eligible expense. ESG funds can be used for emergency health services and emergency mental health services under the street outreach component and emergency shelter components. Only available, behavioral health services are only available to the extent that other appropriate health services are inaccessible or unavailable within that community. And then is COVID testing an eligible expense? Assessing health problems is eligible under street outreach or emergency shelter with the ESG-CV to the extent it is not otherwise available in the community. Transportation to medical care is eligible under street outreach and emergency shelter, which are both eligible activities under the ESG-CV funding. And I'm going to pop up. It looks like we have some questions. And again, some of the questions we might need to dig further into. Matt Phillips had asked for ESG-CV funds. What are the maximum and minimum amounts for each funding category? For the regular ESG, You know what, I think I better say we're going to do some more digging into that question if it had not already been answered. And Matt, we will provide that in the technical assistant Q&A that we're going to send out. Bear with me, I'm digging through here. For Catherine, Catherine asked, do we need to submit a separate application for each funded activity we're applying for? And Scott, you maybe want to chime in, but we are requesting a separate application for each funding activity that you are applying for. So if you are applying for ESG rapid rehousing and ESG coronavirus rapid rehousing, we're asking that you submit a proposal for each funded activity.
Yes, and we want each of those activities separated, program activities, because we may have two teams of evaluators. We may submit one to one and one to the other. Just one thing I forgot to mention when I was going through the different criteria in the scope of work, there's a thing called program design. We broke it into two parts, part 1 and part 2. And the reason we broke it into two parts, we just wanted to make it easy for you in case you wanted to submit more than one application. In part 2, when you answer those questions, they may be similar on all your applications, but we still need those filled out and sent separately, along with financials and all that. So we may get a couple teams of evaluators set up. So that's why we're asking for, if you're going to send more than one proposal, one activity, to send us another package. So I don't know. Hopefully I answered all that.
Thank you, Scott, for addressing that. And then I have just shared my screen, and then can everyone see this my screen with the what the proposal looks like with the program design?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Yes, and then the program design part 1. This is what the what Scott mentioned. Yeah, so part 1, and then we are asking, there are instructions here that says that please check one box only. And then let's say that this one is rapid rehousing. Rapid rehousing can be under ESG or ESG-CV, and then you just need to check one box. But then if you want to apply for both, and then you just need to duplicate. So as the instruction here says, please duplicate this section for the second one, and then check one box only in each section, and then provide your response and a separate cost proposal for each category.
Oh, one thing I forgot to mention too, when you send your proposals in, I said we need one original and one copy. These are hard copies. Inside that, we also need a thumb drive. So everything that you submitted, you can put that, please put that on a thumb drive. If you have more than one application, you can put it all in the same thumb drive. It doesn't matter, just so we have that one thumb drive. So electronically, we can send that information out to the evaluators.
And then I also want to emphasize that, please make sure that the electronic and the hard copy, please make sure that they are identical, because we have experienced before that sometimes the electronic one is missing some important information. And since our evaluation will be based on the electronic version, and then if it is missing some kind of key checkboxes and for your project type, and some key information like the financial, and that would make the evaluation very difficult for your project. So, and then please make sure that the different versions of your proposal, they are identical and include all information. All right, so Jamie, would you take back the screen and present, continue with the PowerPoint?
Perfect, and I'm going to go ahead. I see somebody had asked for us to repeat the funding that is available for this. And once we pull up the PowerPoint, we can shift to the slide that has the dollar amounts.
There's also somebody that has their hand up.
All righty. Okay, so I think this, yep. So while Jamie pulling that up, we have a guest with a hand up. You can go ahead and ask your question. I'm not sure who that is because it just says guest on it. Maybe it's an accident. Jamie, would you mind going up to the slide? It's near the beginning that has the available funding for agencies to apply for. A little bit more. I think one more.
Yeah, so
There we go. Okay, so again, there were two different programs available for applying under this RFP. So under the 2020 ESG, the standard ESG allocation, we have $205,000 available for agencies to apply for. And the eligible funding categories are homeless prevention and rapid rehousing for the 2020 ESG. For the ESG-CV, we have about 1.3 million, and the categories available under that are also rapid rehousing, ESG, homeless outreach, homeless outreach and emergency shelter. So if you go to the next slide, Jamie, it will break down again which funding categories are eligible in this RFP to apply for.
So this current slide with the 6 project types, it is very clear that the first 2 are under ESG, and then number 3 through 6, these 4 are under ESG-CV rapid rehousing. So this is a very good overview slide. So it is 2 programs, 6 project types.
All right, and we have several requests for this PowerPoint or this recording. So Melanie, we're able to send that out, correct?
Yes, we'll be sending out a copy of the presentation, the FAQs, and the recording. The FAQs will be later, but the presentation and the recording will be shortly following this.
Perfect. And we saw a hand. I don't know if this is the same hand raised, but we have a guest raising their hand. Was somebody there with a question? All right, well, if we don't see any other questions, I'm going through them that we can answer immediately. We will follow up with the Q&A. So please.
Lindsay?
Yes.
It looks like there's an Alan, I can't say his last name, that has his hand up.
Oh, I'm just not seeing that. Alan, did you have a question that wasn't answered?
Yes, Alan raised the hand. And Alan, would you like to unmute yourself and feel free to speak or type in your question in the text box?
Yeah, he's unmuted.
Oh, this is Alan. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I just wanted to confirm on the electronic version, the thumb drive, do we include the cost proposal or not? Because I know in the original you wanted it as a separate in an envelope, correct?
Yes, Alan, this is Scott. So yes, that is correct. So in the original, you only need to put the cost proposal in the original and the financials in the original, not the copy. However, on the electronic version, your thumb drive, if you can put it in as a separate file, both the cost proposal and 2 different files.
Perfect. Thank you.
So reason for that, we're going to use that information, but we don't want to give it to the evaluators. We're going to quantify that information ourselves.
Okay,
And
thank-
just a
oh, go ahead.
quick note to that, Alan. If possible, if you can print those financials and then scan them so that they're saved as a PDF. We don't want to lose any formatting if it's saved, just, if it's saved in Excel or Word. When it transfers over and we use it electronically, sometimes we can lose the formatting, and we don't want to do that.
Okay, I usually just take the entire application and scan it, and then separate
good.
the cost proposal. And okay, thank you.
Thank you.
This is Melanie. We have someone in the comment box who put, Jamie or Melanie, can you please add me to the email list? I have been listening on my phone. If that's you, can you please let us know who you are? You can either type it in the chat box or send an email to coc@rivco.org. We only see that it's a guest and we can't tell who you are to make sure that you're included. Also, we have a lot of people that have signed in as participants but have not provided their agency and email information. If you could please make sure that you sign in with that, we appreciate it.
The message is actually from Susan. Susan, we'll go ahead and make sure you're on there.
Thank you, Jamie.
Sure.
Okay, and we have another hand raised. It looks like Alan.
I don't think he put his hand back down.
No,
I feel like I'm seeing a delay in the hand raises on my end for some reason.
okay, I lowered my hand. This is Alan.
All right, Alan. All right. Well, with that being said, thank you everyone for attending this pre-bid conference. Again, we will allow questions on the RFP until 1 o'clock on the 30th. And if you have any immediate questions, go ahead and send them over to coc@rivco.org, and we will be compiling a Q&A and getting responses out as soon as possible. And we look forward to continuing to work with agencies and bringing on new partners as well. So have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for participating.
Thank you.